So today we are going to talk about a very important topic in Apex, which is asynchronous Apex. So asynchronous Apex is basically about executing Apex code asynchronously, or I would say independently in the background. So it's slightly different as compared to the other Apex code that we execute, right? So what is asynchronous Apex? As I said, this is the code, Apex code, still a piece of Apex code that runs in the background and it runs independently. So it does not immediately require a user to initiate the code, etc. So there are different ways of executing asynchronous Apex. And it is something which is capable of, starting to execute on its own independently and in the background. So there is no immediate user interaction required. And the purpose of this is basically to get executed when the system resources are available. All right. So now we may be thinking that, okay, fine, why do we need something like this, which needs to execute in the background or, independently, etc. So let's understand it this way. So there can be two types of Apex code or Apex logics that you have written. There can be two types of logics. So first can be a logic which needs to get executed immediately. For example, a validation rule. So if you're trying to validate a record, when a user is creating the record, if you're trying to validate the record, the validation needs to happen immediately. So if I'm trying to create a record right now, I need the validation to get executed immediately, right? So that is something which needs to get executed the moment that user is interacting with the system, etc., right? But every logic does not need to get executed immediately along with the user interaction. So I'll give you another example. Let's say you have an Apex code or a logic written which would check for some 3-4 fields and either automatically populate the values for those fields, or it will possibly go and clean up some of those fields, right? Now, the requirement for these 3 or 4 fields, let's say it is only meant for a report which is generated once in a month, right? So these kind of logics are not necessarily required to be executed the moment user is interacting with the system. Now, if you try to execute all the logics immediately when the user is still interacting with the system, the problem is that your system will start failing more frequently because it is doing a lot of stuff, in real time. Okay. So just to ensure that your Apex code does not interrupt other important logics, etc., there is this concept of asynchronous Apex. Even let me make it even more simpler for you. Let me give you another example which you would be immediately able to relate to, and then you will be able to understand why there is a need of asynchronous Apex. So think of it like a scenario. Let's say you are sitting in office and you get a call, right? So sometimes what happens, we see the call and we realize that, okay, this call is important and needs to be answered immediately, right? Some calls are like that. There are a few calls. Let's say I'm getting a call from a friend and I have to do a long conversation with that friend. I realize that, oh, maybe this is not the right time. I will possibly call my friend later in the evening, right? So that is asynchronous. That is kind of an asynchronous concept, right? So there are the calls which you immediately need to answer because those may be important. That's synchronous. And the calls where you decide that, okay, fine, let me just, text my friend. Okay, I'll call you back in the evening, because the, conversation is going to be slightly longer. You need a little more extra time and it's not something which is urgent, right? So the same way, you cannot be answering all the calls right in the office because then it will start interrupting your work, right? So same logic applies there. So if we cannot say that if there are 100 logics which are getting executed, we cannot put all the 100 logics to be executed immediately, instantly along with the user interaction, because then it will start impacting the overall performance of the system. It will start interfering with the important logics, right? So you will have to or let me not say important, let me call it as urgent. So if you have to, execute 100 logics, yes, you need to execute all 100 logics. Do you need to execute all 100 logics synchronously, immediately, instantly as the user is interacting with the system? The answer to that is possibly no, right? So whatever can be executed with a little bit of delay, those should be executed as part of asynchronous Apex. All right. So that is the thing. So this is primarily used for long running operations, bigger operations, things which are not that important, cleansing sort of activity, update sort of activity. Those can be executed as part of asynchronous Apex. Now, let's quickly understand the types of asynchronous Apex. There are 4 types of asynchronous Apex. So which would mean basically you can execute or invoke Apex code asynchronously in 4 different ways. The first one is a future method, then we have a Queueable Apex, then we have a schedulable Apex, and then we have batch Apex. So these are the 4 different types of asynchronous Apex which are permitted or allowed within Salesforce.